Hello my loves, Tony here from TL Yarn Crafts, and I am about to blow your mind with the Zippered Puffy stitch. This unique Tunisian crochet stitch creates nested rows of loops that look like bubble wrap and are equally satisfying to squish. If you're ready to dive in, hit that like button and subscribe for weekly crochet inspiration, tutorials, and product reviews that'll take your skills to the next level. This video is one of many helpful tutorials to accompany the Tunisian Snowy Sampler, a gorgeous 20-block Afghan that teaches new Tunisian crochet stitches and techniques with every square. To get the row by row instructions for this square and find out how to make the entire sampler blanket, visit the link in the description. To make the Zippered Puffy stitch, we need to start with a chain of any even number. I'm going to go for 12. So I'll make my slip knot, insert my hook, yarn over and pull through. Make sure these chains aren't too tight because we will need to work into them later. We're going to start with our normal foundation row, and that involves rotating our chain towards us to expose this back channel of bumps. We're going to skip the very first bump here, find that second bump, insert your hook from bottom to top through just that one loop, yarn over and pull up the loop. And we're going to do that for each chain down the line. We'll know we did it right if we've got the same number of loops on our hook as the number of chains that we started with. Let's give it a count and make sure we're in the right place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Perfect. And now we can do our return pass. We'll start with a yarn over, pull through one loop, and then we're going to yarn over and pull through two loops, yarn over, pull through two, yarn over, pull through two again until you have just one loop left on your hook. Just like that, and that completes our foundation, and it should look a little something like this. Now that we've made our foundation row, let's move into our first puff stitch row. So to begin, we need to chain one, so yarn over, pull through one, and that just gets us to the correct height of our puff stitches. Now when making your puff stitches, just make sure you're pulling up nice tall loops. These are tall stitches, and if you don't pull up your loops high enough, you're gonna have trouble passing your hook through those stitches. So we're going to start by putting a puff stitch between our first and second stitch, so right into this space. So first we're going to dip our hook down into the space, yarn over and pull up a tall loop. It's easy to pull up a tall loop if you keep your tension loose in the hand that's holding the yarn, so just keep that in mind. So we pulled up a loop in the space, now we'll yarn over, pull up a loop in the same space, yarn over, pull up a loop in the same space again. So there's our first puff stitch. So now we're going to skip the next space. So this is the space we worked into. We're skipping this space here, puff stitch in the following space. To make our puff stitch, no yarn over to start, just insert into the space, yarn over, pull up a tall loop, yarn over, pull up a loop in the space, yarn over, pull up a loop in the space. Just like that. Let's do it again together. Skip the next space, puff stitch in the following space. Pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop. Let's continue across the row. Skip the next space, puff stitch in the following. Skip the next space, puff stitch in the following. Skip the next space. Your last puff stitch goes in the space before the last stitch here. So right into that space. And now we need to do our last Tunisian stitch. We've got a tall vertical bar here, but we also want to grab the loop behind it. I like to call it the shadow because it sits right behind and it is about half as high as that front loop. So here's our front loop and our shadow is right here, sitting right behind it. So we need to go in and grab both of those loops. So I like to just use the tip of my hook here. I'm gonna shimmy down into that space, grab both of those loops, yarn over and pull up a loop. So this is what your forward pass looks like. Very pretty, nice even puff stitches. So now to start our return pass for this row, we need to chain two. So yarn over, pull through one, and yarn over, pull through 1 again. And this again is just to get to the correct height. Now from here, we need to yarn over and essentially pull through the loops of our puff stitch. So this loop and our puff stitch loops, just like that. After we pull through those loops, we need to yarn over and pull through 1 for a chain 1. And we're going to do that all the way across. So yarn over, pull through the next puff stitch, just kind of separate it out if you need to. Pull through, yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff stitch, yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff stitch, yarn over, pull through 1. And we'll continue that down the line. So when we get here, we need to pull through the puff stitch, but this first loop right here is not part of the puff stitch. So we yarn over, pull through the puff stitch. So now we've got 2 loops left on our hook, and we need to yarn over, pull through 1 loop. We still need to do that chain 1, and now we have 2 loops left. If you're continuing with the same color, you'll yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops and then continue to the next row. I'm actually going to change color. I'm going to be using 3 different colors on this swatch. So I'm going to pink next. So at this point, with those 2 loops left on the hook, I'm going to yarn over with my pink and pull through those last 2 loops. My blue is still attached. I'm just going to leave it there and carry it up the side of my work. And now we can move on to the next row. To start the next row, we need to actually chain 2. So yarn over, pull through 1 and 2 to start. Now we're going to puff stitch between the first and second puff stitch. So right into this space. So we dip down, yarn over, pull up a tall loop, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, pull up the loop. And we're going to continue that down the line, putting a puff stitch between each puff stitch. Once you're done putting puff stitches between all of your puff stitches, we now need to do our last Tunisian stitch. So we're going to come over here and we're going to grab that front bar and the shadow. Just like that. Yarn over and pull through to complete that last stitch. Now from here, we need to chain 2 to start our return pass, just like last time. And again, we're going to yarn over and pull through the puff stitch. Yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff stitch. Yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff stitch. Yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff stitch. Yarn over, pull through 1. I really hope you were pulling up nice tall loops because it should be easy. Pull through 1. I now have 2 loops left of this color, and again, if you're continuing with your color, you're going to yarn over, pull through those last 2 loops, but I am going to change color. I'm going to white next, so I'm going to yarn over, leaving a nice long tail, and pull through those last 2 loops. Now for this row, I need to start with a chain 1, just like that, and I'm going into this space here. It's going to be very important to kind of keep an eye on all of your loops, just keep all of those tails out the way. Now for this row and subsequent rows, we need to work into the space, but we're not just working into the space. We're actually going to grab these vertical bars here. You can see this blue bar laying on top of these puff stitches. That was not available to us in previous rows, but it's available now. And we'll work into those because it'll give us a more nested look to our puff stitches as opposed to kind of this open space underneath them. It's just gonna close that up a little bit, make them look a little neater. So as I dip down into this space, I'm just grabbing that blue vertical bar, going all the way into the space, yarn over, pull up a nice tall loop. Now I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop. So we're making the same puff stitches, we're just being sure to grab that vertical bar here. So here in this next space, I'm grabbing this blue vertical bar. So going down under that bar, pushing my hook to the back of the work, pulling up a nice tall loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop. Again, in this next space, make sure you grab the bar, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and one more time. And we're going to do that all the way down the line, placing our last puff stitch in the space before our last stitch of the row. Okay, last space is here, so we do need to place a puff stitch here. Insert, yarn over, pull up a nice tall loop. There's 2 and 3. Work our edge stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we need to chain 2 to start our return pass. Yarn over, pull through the puff, yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff, yarn over, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through the puff, yarn over, pull through 1. Remember, on this last puff stitch, this very first loop is not part of the puff. So we yarn over, pull through the puff, yarn over, pull through 1, and then we're going to change color. So all my colors are now attached, and I'm gonna go to blue next. So I'm just pulling my blue up the side of the work. I'll yarn over, kind of get my white out of the way, and pull through those last 2 loops. So for this row, remember we now need to chain 2, and we're going into this space here. Now, as before, we do have a horizontal bar that we'll be able to work under. It's right here. So this one is pink. It's laying right on top of this pink puff stitch. And we've got one in each of our spaces. So make sure you grab those. So I'm going under that bar, yarn over, pull up a nice tall loop, yarn over, pull up your loop, and then one more time, yarn over and pull up your loop. Into the next space. And the next space. All the way across. And we're skipping this puff stitch and this space here. We're going directly into our edge stitch from here. Chain 2 to start the return pass. Yarn over, pull through the puff, chain 1. Yarn over through the puff, chain 1, 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 and then we change color again. So now you're getting the gist of it. I'm gonna add a bit more fabric onto my work. Join me back here and I'll show you how to bind off. I added just a few more rows onto my piece and I just love how it's looking, so I'm ready to bind off. Now, when you are ready to bind off, you need to finish with a row that's like this, where you have a puff stitch in that very first and very last space. Otherwise, your bind off's gonna look completely crazy. So you have to finish with one of these rows, okay? So once I did, I completed my return pass until I had 1 loop left on the hook, and I also fastened off the other colors that I'm not using. So whatever color you use for that last row, you're also going to use for your bind off. So here we go. We're gonna start with a chain 1 to start, and then we need to slip stitch in the top of this first puff stitch. So it does have a horizontal bar here, so we're just gonna grab that bar, yarn over, and slip stitch. Just keep those slip stitches nice and loose. And next we're going to single crochet in the top bar of this next space. So remember, before we were putting puff stitches in that bar, but now we can grab that bar and complete a single crochet. Slip stitch in the puff, single crochet in the space. Slip stitch in the puff, single crochet in the space. The single crochets are a little bit taller and the slip stitches, of course, are short. So it ends up evening out your top edge here. Single in the space, slip stitch in the top of this last puff stitch, and then we're gonna slip stitch in our edge stitch here. So we still wanna grab the front bar and the little shadow, yarn over, and pull through to complete as for a slip stitch. At this point, we can fasten off, pull up that loop nice and high, and we have our beautiful zippered puff stitch. This is a really gorgeous stitch. I love the fabric that it makes. It is incredibly dense. So just keep that in mind, and it eats up some yarn, okay? Another thing to note is that the edges on this stitch aren't super duper pretty and beautiful like you can often get with Tunisian crochet. They're all right, but I would recommend either seaming pieces together or adding a border just to make things a little bit neater. But either way, you now know how to do the zippered puff stitch. I'm super proud of you, and I can't wait to see you in the next tutorial.